he's quoted as being a brilliant psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, child psychologist. It was more that he, kind of living a lie.
Concentrate.
He was just as scared as...
Bruce Willis once stunned the world with his chilling performance in The Sixth Sense. But what fans never realized was the maze of secrets buried beneath the film's haunting surface.
Sometimes you feel it inside, like you're falling down real fast. But you're really just standing still.
The truth? Willis himself was kept in the dark, forced into silence, and pushed to play a role unlike any he had ever faced. Why did Disney punish him into this movie? What bizarre hidden details did M. Night Shyamalan weave into the story? And how did Willis finally admit the shocking truth behind the scenes? This is where the curtain finally lifts. The Disney punishment deal. When audiences saw Bruce Willis step into the role of Dr. Malcolm Crowe in The Sixth Sense, many assumed it was just another big Hollywood casting choice. What they didn't know was that this wasn't a role Willis picked because of creative passion or artistic desire. In fact, he was contractually bound to do it, and the story behind how he ended up in Shyamalan's thriller is as dramatic as the film itself. Long before the words, "I see dead people," entered pop culture,
I want to tell you my secret now. I see dead people.
Bruce Willis was embroiled in a behind-the-scenes fiasco with Disney that nearly derailed his career and forced him into one of the most unexpected comebacks of his life. The trouble began with a film dubbed The Broadway Brawler. The film was supposed to be a romantic comedy starring Willis, with Disney producing and Willis co-producing. But once you put a powerful Hollywood star into a position of control over production, all hell can break loose. And break loose it did. 3 weeks into filming, Willis made broad brush changes that had the studio reeling. He fired the director, the cinematographer, and a lot of the crew, saying, "This is not working." In a sense, firing almost everybody on a production is equivalent to pulling the plug on life support. This left Disney no option but to put the film down altogether, with nothing to show for it except outtakes and a massive loss of $17.5 million. For a studio such as Disney, that kind of loss was not only a financial one, it was an embarrassment. Executives had counted on Willis to bring star power, only to watch the project fall apart in record time. They were not about to let him walk away unhurt. Disney could have blacklisted him for being unreliable and difficult, had they so desired. Instead, they wanted a penalty that would serve the dual purpose of punishing him and allowing him to make some amends. Willis was put into a settlement whereby he would act in 3 Disney productions at a reduced salary, with a good percentage of his pay going to offset the losses of The Broadway Brawler. The first film was Armageddon, 1998, a Michael Bay blockbuster and global hit. The second was The Sixth Sense. The third was The Kid, 2000, a lighter, family-centered fare that rounded things off. To the fans, it seemed that Willis was just making eclectic career decisions. In reality, each one of those films was a step forward in a carefully negotiated deal to pay Disney back and redeem himself. Irony marks the road back to freedom when one goes through an ordeal. What was then turned as punishment became, for him, a colossal blessing to his career. He made $10 million off the film, but recovery of his image as an actor proved a lot more. The critics had already begun to classify him as the riotous action hero of Die Hard, one who was more suited for explosions rather than serious drama. But in Shyamalan's film, he gave a performance of such restraint and introspection that it astounded audiences and critics alike. His role as a child psychologist trying to understand a ghost-seeing boy gave Willis a dramatic edge of many who thought he had not. Ironically, Disney had profited from both, regaining some of its lost funds and benefiting financially from a film that grossed more than $672 million worldwide. What had begun as a curse had finished as one of the most successful supernatural thrillers of all time. And for Willis, proof that even while being downed by Hollywood, he could still soar. But the way Willis was kept in the dark during filming reveals just how deep the secrecy went. Willis left in the dark. One of the strangest truths about The Sixth Sense is that Bruce Willis, the man at the center of it all, was kept almost completely in the dark about the very story he was starring in. Most actors walk onto a set with a clear vision of their character's arc, their emotional beats, and the final outcome. But in this case, Willis was deliberately denied the full picture. Why? Because director M. Night Shyamalan and the producers were determined to guard the film's jaw-dropping twist with the kind of secrecy usually reserved for classified government files. From the very beginning, the script was treated like a sacred document. Willis wasn't even given the final 10 pages. Instead, those pages were locked away in what the crew called the vault, a password-protected digital file accessible only to a handful of people, including Shyamalan. This wasn't just studio paranoia. Shyamalan knew that the success of The Sixth Sense depended entirely on audiences not figuring out that Malcolm Crowe, Willis's character, was dead the entire time. If even the smallest hint leaked, the entire experience would collapse. So, the solution was simple. Keep the truth from almost everyone, even the film's lead actor. At no point was the secrecy limited to missing script pages. During post-production, Willis had to record fake lines in his automated dialogue replacement sessions. These controversial lines were not meant for the final cut, and were definitely intended for the misled background sound engineers and editors, so that even while the project was still in secrecy behind the scenes, no one could piece the puzzle early. The team was under strict orders not to divulge about crucial props like the wedding ring, hospital monitors, or like Malcolm's clothing. Everything was managed with an obsessive near care. For Willis, it was the surreal effect. Scene after scene, he played, not realizing the entire significance of that distance between his character and the living world. Years later in interviews, Willis admitted that he didn't really understand that ending until the very first cast and crew screening. Sitting in the theater with everybody else, he watched as the revelation unfolded. Malcolm Crowe wasn't alive. He was one of the dead people Cole had been seeing all along. Willis reacted with pure shock, just as, later in the year, millions of audience members would experience that twist in theaters. Shyamalan meant that moment. If Willis had not known the truth during the filming, it would give him the detached, subtle, melancholic tone needed for the performance of the character. Instead of acting as if he was a ghost, Willis was confused, saddened, and disconnected. This was precisely the emotional tone Anderson's character would require to sell his arc. It was this creative deception, painstakingly staged even against the lead actor, that was the genius of the premise. By now, the trade winds were swinging mostly unfavorably toward Willis, but that secrecy was double-edged. With shooting not necessarily in sequence, Willis would often not be in possession of the full context of a scene. He had to trust Shyamalan entirely, relying on the director's vague suggestions without ever demanding full justification. This indeed was a reverse of the way things operate in Hollywood. Now, the action star, who is expected to be in command, was suddenly blind, uncertain where the story is really heading. But after the most shocking truth had been revealed, both in the story world and in the actual world, Willis's performance took on yet another meaning. The audience went back to the film and noticed the silences, how Willis never interacted with anyone but Cole, the moments when grief would seem to overshadow his words. What they did not realize was that even the actor had walked through those shadows with no map. Yet the deception didn't end there. Willis had to retrain his very body to keep the illusion alive. The right-hand trick. When people think about The Sixth Sense, they usually remember Haley Joel Osment's chilling line or the film's unforgettable twist. What most don't realize is that Bruce Willis himself had to undergo a quiet, almost invisible transformation to make sure that twist wasn't spoiled. It wasn't about makeup or costume, it was about his hands. To hide one of the most critical clues in the entire movie, Willis had to retrain himself to act like a completely different person by switching the hand he used for nearly everything. In real life, Bruce Willis is left-handed. It's the hand he naturally writes with, gestures with, and uses for small actions. But on set, that posed a massive problem. After Malcolm is shot at the beginning of the movie, the fact that he no longer wears his wedding ring is one of the key visual clues to his true fate. Shyamalan knew that if audiences saw Willis's left hand too clearly, they might notice the absence of the ring long before the final revelation. A missing ring, caught in a single frame, could have unraveled the entire film. It accessed the unthinkable yet flawless path. Willis would play in all scenes as a right-handed man, writing with his right hand and pouring drinks with it, while being conscious of even the subtlest manipulation of gestures. This worked as an invisible means of deception that kept the camera from lingering too long on his left hand. To the unknowing viewer, nothing seemed amiss. To the discerning eye, it appeared altogether natural. However, in the background, Willis spent hours training to pull off the switch with tantamount perfection. While it may sound slight, that adjustment had sweeping ramifications. When the twist gets revealed, the audience rewinds the film in their heads and realizes that they never even noticed that the ring was missing. This little red herring was convincing because Willis pulled it off with utter conviction. Moving his wedding hand out of the shot and training his body to forget its habitual motions allowed the illusion to thrive without a hitch. Beyond the hand trick, every aspect of Willis's performance was grounded in restraint. He did not play Malcolm as an angry ghost or a man bent on revenge. He played him as a grieving husband in denial, quietly carrying himself with a sense of unfinished business. This right-handed training added a slightly awkward and forlorn touch to the performance. He appeared to be a man who was not quite comfortable in his own skin, which is exactly what Malcolm was supposed to embody. Audiences missed that detail the first time, and that's what pays off. It makes the wedding ring reveal in the end feel like a thunderclap because no one was anticipating it. Today, in fact, fans watching The Sixth Sense are nevertheless enchanted by how something so obvious could be so brilliantly hidden in plain sight. A lot of it had to do with such carefully crafted decisions as the right-hand trick, the combination of disciplined performance and directorial foresight. Still, the greatest clues weren't in Willis's performance at all. They were sewn into the film's very fabric. The secret language of red. If Bruce Willis's right-hand trick was the invisible misdirection, then M. Night Shyamalan's use of color was the hidden map guiding audiences toward the truth without them ever realizing it. The Sixth Sense wasn't just a ghost story, it was a carefully crafted puzzle, where even the colors on screen carried meaning. At the heart of that puzzle was a secret language, the color red. Shyamalan, along with cinematographer Tak Fujimoto, created an entire visual code around this single color. Red was not random, and it was never just decoration. Whenever red appeared on screen, it signaled something uncanny, a moment where the barrier between the living and the dead grew thin, a crimson doorknob that refused to open, a lone red balloon floating toward danger, a wax saint statue glowing in Cole's bedroom. Each of these objects wasn't just a prop. They were cinematic breadcrumbs, quietly alerting the audience that something otherworldly was taking place. The task behind making this work was unusually trying and long. Shyamalan and Fujimoto did not pick a strong red from the fabric stores. Instead, they ran 15 different tests on many varieties to find just the right shade that would contrast against a purposely subdued palette of icy blues and very pale grays consistent with the film's tone. The Sixth Sense was shot in a fashion that sucked warmth from nearly every scene, which gave the narrative a very cold, ghostly feel. The red thus chosen not only popped against these backgrounds, it screamed from the little corner it occupied. Some tricks are only done with ulterior motives. Shyamalan, by a convention associating red with moments of unearthly presence, trained the subconscious of the audience into his own design. While viewers may not have been aware of the pattern on a conscious level, their minds had surely picked it up. And so an undefinable sensation of wrongness would set in each time something red was on the screen. This was a veritable masterclass in the suggestion of cinema, whereby proof was offered that fear doesn't always come in the shape of something scary. Sometimes it comes packaged in a single color, placed with careful consideration. Most famous, the blocked basement door. Malcolm was struggling with it throughout the film, but unable to open it. In the center frame is a red doorknob. The struggle is still in the audience's minds, but they go with it since Willis has imbued the moment with little frustration. Only on the rewatch does it snap back. The red doorknob was screaming the truth. It was never stuck. Malcolm was dead, and the door was never meant for him. The color told us that all along. It is with this choice that Shyamalan then began to lift his creation above the realm of ordinary horror. Instead of splattering the screen with gore and grotesque imagery, Shyamalan invented a language of terrors. Red became the ghostly whisper. It didn't make its presence felt, implicating the depths of the mind slowly and quietly, disturbing you for reasons unknown. This is why The Sixth Sense carries tremendous rewatch value. Each viewing offers the keys in this hidden language, yet another moment where Shyamalan purposefully laid clues in front of us. For Bruce Willis, this secret language just enhanced the feeling that he was in a movie that was not like any other in Hollywood at that time. While he was keeping all his physicality in check to cover the missing ring, the film was steadily working to layer in its own symbolic details to create the illusion. The actor and the director thus wove a web of deceit so finely that the audiences never had a chance of guessing the real climax. And if color could whisper to audiences, imagine how one iconic line almost screamed the secret too soon. The line that almost vanished. When people talk about The Sixth Sense, one line always rises above the rest. I see dead people. It's whispered in pop culture, quoted in parodies, and etched into the memory of anyone who's ever seen the film. But here's the shocking truth. This line, arguably the heartbeat of the entire movie, almost never made it to the screen. Studio executives thought it was too cheesy, too obvious, and too risky. Without Shyamalan's stubborn insistence, The Sixth Sense would have lost the very line that defined it. In the early days of test screenings and marketing surveys, feedback forms painted an alarming picture. Viewers and executives worried that the phrase sounded cliché, like something out of a cheap ghost story instead of a carefully constructed psychological thriller. Disney executives pushed hard to cut it, fearing audiences would laugh at the delivery instead of shivering at its weight. Some even suggested rewriting it into longer, more explicit dialogue that would spell things out instead of letting the simplicity carry the power. To them, the understated whisper seemed weak compared to blockbuster standards. But Shyamalan knew the truth. The line had to pull power, not as far as volume or length was concerned, but in the restraint. Haley Joel Osment didn't give the line with theatrical flair. The delivery, incredibly flat and fragile, was terrifying in its quietly contained register. It sounded not like a punchline, instead more like a confession, a child burdening himself with something too heavy for his small shoulders. There was no way the studio would touch that moment, and Shyamalan fought hard behind closed doors and, when words failed, resorted to evidence. In convincing the executives and making them believe in his proposal, Shyamalan played to the audio recordings of kids describing nightmares. These kids, speaking in high-pitched, monotonous voice, narrated such terrifying sight experience that with blunt calmness, these stories became all the more horrifying. The room remained still. It was then when the group of executives understood what Shyamalan had already known, that all this quietness had made the line scaring. It wasn't very much overstatement for the phrase to sink into people's bones that, surprisingly, it saved the line. But ironically, exactly what the executives feared most animal from the line became, quite clearly, the same best form possible. It was to become iconic, whispered on trailers, repeated within living rooms, instantly recognizable even to outsiders who had never laid their eyes on the film. I see dead people, indeed, transformed from a hypothetical liability into the greatest asset the film had. The phrase that pulled audiences into theaters, the one that critics couldn't stop quoting, the one that forever immortalized The Sixth Sense in pop culture history. It further excited this segment as it had almost unveiled the biggest secret of the movie. While editing, the scene was a worry to producer Frank Marshall, who believed it went overboard in hinting at Malcolm's ghostly status. The delivery by Osment, Mackey's performance, and the slow, purposeful camera zoom into his face made Marshall uneasy that audience members would figure out his intent too soon, and hence, Willis would also belong to that group of dead people. The scene was desperately brought up for trimming, yet Shyamalan stood to his decision. His gamble worked. Despite the prolonged shot focus, audiences took no notice. The line, therefore, survived the cut, being so close to a foreshadow in the poetic sense or a glaring spoiler. Without that whisper, it would have been a whole different movie. Suffice to say, the plot twist would still shock. The performances would still tug on the heartstrings, but without that line, which became synonymous with this film. These days, it is hard to imagine it without. That one line is what catapulted the film from cinema to our everyday parlance. It became more than a line. It became a cultural ghost, haunting us long after the credits have rolled. Yet for all its haunting words, what was happening behind the scenes with Willis was something fans never guessed. Bruce Willis, party host of the dead. When audiences think of The Sixth Sense, they picture a cold, eerie atmosphere filled with haunted hallways, whispered confessions, and a child tormented by visions of the dead. But off-camera, the mood was often anything but grim, and that was thanks to Bruce Willis. The same actor who delivered such a restrained and melancholic performance on screen became the life of the party once the cameras stopped rolling. If the production was haunted by tension and secrecy, Willis was the one who broke through the gloom with laughter, music, and late-night revelry. By the late 1990s, Willis was already one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, known for his quick wit and larger-than-life personality. On the set of The Sixth Sense, he brought that same charisma to his cast and crew. The film was shot in Philadelphia, often under physically and emotionally draining conditions. Shyamalan demanded long hours of quiet intensity, and Haley Joel Osment's performance as Cole required a heaviness that could weigh down even the adults around him. Willis, sensing the need for balance, stepped into the role of morale booster. He threw small parties for the cast and crew, ensuring the people had an outlet after grueling days of filming. These were not grand Hollywood galas. They tended toward more intimate gatherings wherein Willis himself often played the part of the DJ. By spinning records and cracking jokes, he created just the atmosphere for people to forget, even if momentarily, that they were working on a story permeated with death and sadness. His patented way of brightening the dark days of production became our secret weapon for keeping the team together during what was easily one of the more emotionally taxing films of the decade. One of the most legendary stories from the set concerned Willis and a young, relatively inexperienced M. Night Shyamalan. In his 20s, Shyamalan was just stepping his way into directing and very much in awe of working with an A-list star. According to Shyamalan himself, Willis that evening apparently opted to give the young director what he jokingly called his first Hollywood hangover. Willis poured small drinks, all the while teasing Shyamalan by calling them candy. Wanting to be anything but an inexperienced buffoon in front of his leading man, Shyamalan drank and woke up with quite a headache the next morning. Years later, he laughed about it, explaining how the entire affair proved a kind of initiation rite into the real Hollywood. Willis's sense of humor was not confined to just parties. While on set, he would often use his dastardly good timing to break any tension. If a scene had left the room heavy with silence, he would either crack a joke or start teasing some of the crew members. This ability to transition between dark moods for a performance and playful, light spirit showed that Willis really understood what a production often requires to survive. Without such moments, the pressure of secrecy, the burden of telling Mary's story, and the cold atmosphere of the film locations in Philadelphia might have crushed morale altogether. For Osment, who was only 10 at the time, the warmth of Willis offered a sense of security. Working with an A-list star would have been intimidating, but Willis treated him as a colleague rather than a young actor. Such fraternity between Willis and Osment helped the latter give the kind of believable performance that was crucial to the narrative force of the film. Given its reputation for being an unsettling ghost story, it might be easy to forget that it was also a workplace. People worked long nights with tight schedules, carrying the stress of protecting one of the greatest twists in cinematic history. By taking on the role of host, Willis ensured that the production never lost its humanity. The laughter, the music, and even the hangovers became just as much a part of the legacy of the film as the ghostly scares. But while Willis played the Joker off-screen, others went through harrowing transformations that shook the set. Shocking transformations. For all the levity Bruce Willis brought behind the scenes, not everyone on The Sixth Sense escaped the production with laughs and fond memories. Some of the film's most unforgettable performances came at a physical or emotional cost, and strange, unexplainable incidents on set only deepened the movie's reputation as something otherworldly. It wasn't just the story that unsettled people. The making of the film had its own eerie and extreme undertones. One of the most dramatic transformations came from Donnie Wahlberg, who played Vincent Gray, Malcolm's former patient in the film's shocking opening scene. Wahlberg is only on screen for about 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes are some of the most intense in the entire movie. To embody the tortured, emaciated figure of Vincent, Wahlberg committed to a near unthinkable physical regimen. He lost 43 pounds in just 5 weeks. He moved to New York to live without cash or credit cards, sometimes even sleeping on park benches, in fact, all to gain a sense of someone totally broke. He showed up sallow, hollow-eyed, and gaunt in the eventual act of confrontation with Willis in a restroom. Makeup could never have done that. There is a fine line between the kind of performing and personal suffering that goes into this punishing transformation. Wahlberg acknowledged it was beyond what he usually does in preparation, but that it lent authenticity to the role. He felt it wasn't just the extremities of the actors. M. Night Shyamalan captioned a deadly hospital scene that has never been brought to light. He spoke later in the interviews with Haley Joel Osment about a deleted scene of Cole walking in a corridor lined with disfigured and mutilated ghosts, all reaching out to him. According to the drastic imagery it contained, it would have taken the movie completely away from an idea of psychological suspense and into actual horror. Shyamalan cut it, realizing that the restraint, not gore, worked in The Sixth Sense. But even the existence of that scene speaks volumes about how the film almost became much darker and how finely balanced its tone was, as calibrated by Shyamalan. More unnerving were the ghostly experiences reported between takes. For instance, Toni Collette, who played Cole's mother Lynn, confessed to waking in the night in her hotel room in Philadelphia at odd times, 1:11, 3:33, 4:44. It started out as nothing, but it began to be so exact that she couldn't write it off anymore. Though she never claimed to have seen any ghosts, this whole pattern left her rattled as if something was afoot other than coincidence. Misha Barton, the ghostly Kira, said that she felt sometimes being watched, or sometimes she would just get chills when she was alone on the set without any cooling systems running. Some of the production crew even mentioned hearing unexplained sounds haunting the old convention center where almost all of the film's shots were taken. All this seemed to add to the fact that the production site was perhaps haunted in its own right. With these stories, together with the cold atmosphere of the film, the legends around The Sixth Sense began to gain currency. This was not merely a film about seeing dead people. Rather, it was a production where actors went extreme, and even the finest honed professionals felt the hairs on the nape of their necks stand up for reasons they could not explain. For Bruce Willis, working on a film that he hadn't even chosen to do was all the more surreal by these extremes. What began as a contractual punishment turned into a cultural phenomenon in which all sorts of stories were told concerning its metamorphosis, secrecy, and rumors of the supernatural. The making of The Sixth Sense was haunted by its own story. Now that the truth is out, every rewatch feels different. Every scene heavier, every clue clearer. What do you think about Willis finally breaking the silence? Did knowing these secrets change how you see the film? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from behind Hollywood's greatest films.